Kings are justly called gods for what that they exercise a manner or resemblance of divine power upon earth. James the Sixth and First. When Queen Elizabeth I died in 1603, the Tudor dynasty died with her. The Privy Council, anticipating the chaos of another disputed succession, approached James VI, the King of Scotland, and invited him to become the King of England. Parliament and James both agreed to the decision, and when Elizabeth died, James was quickly proclaimed king. 4 months later, he was crowned at Westminster Abbey. But why did the Privy Council approach James? What made this Scottish king an ideal candidate to take over the throne of England following the decades long reign of Elizabeth I? He was distantly related to Elizabeth by blood. His great great grandfather was Henry VII, and his great grandmother was Elizabeth's aunt. His great grandfather, however, was from the house of Stuart, so James would belong to this house rather than to the Tudor dynasty. His pedigree, however, wasn't enough to ensure that he was a good candidate to take over the throne of England. His mother, Mary Queen of Scots, had a similar claim on the throne, yet Protestant factions in Scotland deposed Mary when James was only a year old. She would remain imprisoned for the next 20 years. On Elizabeth's orders, this former Queen of Scotland was then executed in 1587, since she had both a legitimate claim to the throne and was a faithful Roman Catholic. James inherited from his mother the Kingdom of Scotland and grew up living under a series of regents who governed in the child king's stead. Though his mother had been a Roman Catholic, those responsible for the king's upbringing were sure to raise him as a Protestant in the Church of Scotland. This would be one of the main factors behind the decision for him to be the one to replace Queen Elizabeth as ruler of England. Another factor that helped him was that the king already had two sons, Henry and Charles. Should anything happen to James, the succession would be more secure than it had been in nearly a century. A final factor was his close alliance to Elizabeth I, whom he supported diplomatically while England was grappling with Spain in the 1580s. Therefore, when James was coronated in July of 1603, he had a lot going for him. His reign promised to be a stabilizing force in England, at least for the Protestants. For Roman Catholics in England, James's continued anti-Catholic policies caused a deal of fear and tension, which reached a crisis point in the coming years. In 1604, however, James initiated the Hampton Court Conference, which would lead to his crowning achievement, the King James Bible. The main goal of this conference had been to gather Anglican and Puritan elements within the Church of England and to attempt to address the concerns of both groups. A major issue was that there was not a standard English Bible yet available, so James set about authorizing a group of church scholars to translate the Old and New Testaments into English. The result was the King James Authorized Version, or King James Bible. It would be published in 1611 and became the standard English translation of Scripture. But this did nothing to help Roman Catholics suffering from persecution in Protestant England. In the autumn of 1605, a group of English Roman Catholics met to determine the best course of action to restore Roman Catholicism to England. They elected to assassinate the king, his family, and many members of the government by placing gunpowder beneath Parliament and setting it off during the state opening of Parliament on November 5th. However, the conspirator in charge of setting off the charge, Guy Fawkes, was caught, and the event never took place. The conspirators were hunted down and killed or executed. The next year, 1606, James granted a charter to the Virginia Company, authorizing it to establish two permanent colonies in North America. The first of these, Jamestown, was established in 1607 and named in honor of the king. Domestically, the king encountered resistance. Though he attempted to merge the kingdoms of England and Scotland, legally he was unable to do so. He therefore reigned as king over both countries separately, while they maintained their own governments. The two would not be unified until more than a century later. James dealt with resistance from Scottish nobles to his plans to unify the two nations, and struggled with the English Parliament over financial matters. The latter struggle would lay the groundwork for the events of the English Civil War in the mid 17th century. When James died in 1625, the Stuart dynasty was well on its way. Things didn't necessarily look bright, but the uncertainty of succession, which marked the Tudor age a century before, had now been resolved. James's son Charles lived to succeed his father, though his reign would prove far more turbulent.